Hello fans, it's time to face the music. In true Sesame Street style, this week's Fact Me Up is brought to you by the letters A to G, what musical notes are made out of, and the number 4, as we run down the musical history of Brighton based on years what end in 4. Roll titles. Thomas Henry Sargent celebrated his 60th birthday in 1954. He retired 4 years later and died in 1963 at 25 Burlington Street. You may know him better by his stage name, Max Miller. He was born at 43 Hereford Street, Kemptown, that building long since demolished. Music hall singer and comedian Miller, the so-called cheeky chappie, was arguably the most famous entertainer of his day and Brighton's first pop star. He is commemorated around town more than anybody else, with multiple blue plaques, a statue, and even a bit of the seafront named after him, albeit not a very good bit. What happened in Brighton in 1964? Mods and rockers happened. Two youth tribes divided by their taste in vehicles, fashion and music. Soul, ska and R&B for the mods, rock and roll, obviously, for the rockers. Whilst the two groups clashed in many seaside resorts, it was the Whitsun Bank Holiday fisticuffs in Brighton in May 1964 that were the most famous. They would inspire a 1973 Who concept album that would become the movie most associated with Brighton, 1979's Quadrophenia. Most of the second half of the film is set down here, with prominent Brighton locations including the pier, the beach, the Grand Hotel where that tit Sting works as a bellboy, and Shag Alley, which is now locked up to stop shagging. Having won the Eurovision Song Contest 2 years in a row, the eeny-weeny country of Luxembourg couldn't afford to stage the 1974 contest. Step forward Brighton Dome to host the most famous Eurovision ever. It was an eventful contest. Several countries withdrew, including France and Malta. The Italian entry was banned in Italy because its repetition of the word sì, yes, was feared to possibly influence voting in a referendum on whether to ban divorce. Meanwhile, the Portuguese entry triggered an actual revolution. The winning song was, of course, Waterloo by ABBA, the most famous Eurovision song of all time. The Italian entry C came second, and 59% of Italians voted no in the referendum, so divorce stayed legal. Incidentally, ABBA recently announced that they've recorded their first new songs in 35 years. Whoa! Whilst we couldn't find a major Brighton music event for 1984, that year did see possibly the biggest global news event to take place in the town in the 20th century. We're referring, of course, to the IRA bombing of the Grand Hotel during Conservative Party conference. Margaret Thatcher had been the intended target, and she's almost certainly the person most lyrically targeted in the history of British music. Brighton punk and post-punk bands are no exception to this. 1981's Another Hero by the Poison Girls is just one example of a Thatcher-baiting Brighton song. As for Donald Trump, well, just last year, in August 2017, the lead singer of original and still going Brighton punks Peter and the Test Tube Babies was denied access to the USA. The reason? Because he had dressed up as and mocked Trump whilst touring Germany. When it comes to counterculture music and Brighton, two words hang heavy in the air: the Levellers. Though much derided by the music press, the crusty folk rockers were one of the biggest bands of the mid-90s. When they headlined the Glastonbury Festival in 1994, they played in front of an estimated 300,000 people. This remains the largest audience for any act in Glastonbury history. 1994 also saw the band invest a big chunk of their earnings in buying and doing up a derelict factory in Brighton. The so-called Metway, a recording studio and office complex on Canning Street, is still going strong. In 2004, Brighton and Hove Albion renamed their Withdean Stadium for one game only as Palookaville. This was to tie in with the release of an album of the same name by local big beat record jockey Fatboy Slim. Mr Slim and his record label Skint largely kept the Albion afloat in these years when the Premier League was several pipe dreams away. The event most locals most remember Fatboy for occurred 2 years earlier in 2002 when he played to 250,000 people on Brighton Beach. 2014 saw the first Brighton Music Conference. The fifth of these annual events took place just a few days ago. This demonstrates the pivotal role Brighton plays in the current corporate indie scene. See also BIM, the music college launched in Brighton that now has bases all over the UK, as well as Dublin, Berlin and Hamburg, and also the Great Escape Festival, when hipsters from all over Britain descend on Brighton for the weekend to compare haircuts and possibly listen to some bands. And that's the end of our summary of Brighton's musical history. Cue outro. Next week on Fact Me Up, the story of how Brighton ruled the UK at American sports. Or at least some of them.